Good evening. Welcome to the QCIS channel. We're on this channel, get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Leon Jones, and tonight I'm going to get into a short presentation regarding the scope of work and a construction contract. Now, I'm doing construction because if you are working particularly in the civil infrastructure or working for DOTs or you're working for a city department of public works, well, construction season is about to begin. Now, I just myself went through some training on some asphalt. I didn't present it up here, but I passed the HMA field supervisor's exam by NDOT. Needed 70 to pass. I got a 93 on it. Wasn't bad. But I know asphalt. And you're going to see a lot of paving jobs going on, and that's going to be your scope of work. And basically, I'm just going to give you my overview of the scope of work, and then I'm going to give you a more detailed definition of a scope of work. Now, basically, when we talk about the scope of work, that's the task or the activity that is going to be performed within the contract. And you need to know your scope of work, and I'm going to get into showing you how I will create an SOP, standard operating procedures. That's for quality control. But getting into the scope of work, you need to look over that important piece of information when it comes to a contract. Now, let's go into sharing my screen. And here's what we really mean by scope of work. Basically, you can look at it in a couple of ways. In construction, it defines the detailed description of the work to be performed for a specific construction contract. Again, SOW, you're going to see that acronym. SO stands for scope of work. Particularly in construction, it's going to define the description of work to be performed for a specific construction project. And it provides clear documentation of all work results, processes, and other necessary activities to fulfill the objects of the project. And also, you can look at the scope of work in a construction contract in a detailed document that outlines the exact parameters of a construction project, specifying what work is included, the project objectives, deliverables, timelines, responsibilities of each party, and any limitations, ensuring all parties have a clear understanding of what is expected to be completed. Now, you also have your key elements in the scope of work, your project overview, your project objectives, your site details, your detailed work breakdown, deliverables, timeline and milestones, materials and specifications, responsibilities and roles, exclusions, and of course, limitations. So, why is a clear scope of work important? Well, you're going to reduce disputes. You're going to come up with accurate budgeting, because in construction, you want to complete your job on time and under budget. And most of all, just like anything else, you want efficient project management. And if you have everything outlined, because basically scope of work, just like a SOP, they're all outlined. And when it's outlined, you have a clear understanding of what's going to be done. Now, I'm going to go over a PowerPoint, and this is from Caltrans. And I'm going to talk about the scope of work. Now, scope of work objectives. What you have to do is list your contract documents, know your authority to make changes, define the work character change, understand differing site conditions. Now again, the scope of work, the contract, construct the work described in the notice to bidders and is described in the contract. Now what you have here, these are your work descriptions, most likely hyperlinks. Now, one thing you need to know about construction, the plans, specifications, and other contract documents shall, remember what I said, shall govern the work. Now, in the scope of work, you're going to have your special provisions, project plans, revised standard specifications, revised standard plans, and of course, other. Now, the scope of work, when we deal with the intent of plans and specifications, well, the contractor, what they're going to do, they're going to furnish the resources to complete the work as described in the contract, where the means and methods to complete the work are not described. So the contractor will choose the means and methods to complete the work. Now, when you're out there inspecting the work, as an inspector, do not give any suggestions regarding means and methods to the contractor. Why? Because if something goes wrong, they can blame it on the inspector. It is the contract's job to get the job done, and they're going to use the best means and methods to accomplish the tasks. That's why they were hired, to do the job. Now, for the scope of work, be as familiar with the work to be done, and that comes from your customs, terminology, commonly accepted practices, and your plans and specifications. Now, Chapter 4, Construction Details, CTCM, which this is most likely a Caltrans, which is the California Department of Transportation, and their specs. So each section out of this manual in Chapter 4 corresponds to a section in the CTSS. Contains the following parts: general, before the work begins, during the course of work, and measurement, and of course pavement. And then you have to deal with ambiguities and conflicts with plans and specifications. And when that happens, use engineering judgment. Think about a reasonable contractor's viewpoint. Also, the agency may make changes as well within the scope of work. They can add extra work, which means there's going to be a change order. And speaking of change orders, what a change order does, it changes the value of the original contract, but also you can utilize a change order to zero out your overruns and underruns. So basically, when you have a change order, that's a formal change to the contract. It is legal binding, and the details, you're going to have your changes or added extra work, your time adjustment, and your payment basis. A change order is approved when the agency signs it. So that means extra work by the contractor without an approved change order or written direction from the RE is not paid for. Change orders will be covered in depth, of course, in a later module if you're taking this course. Now, when we deal with scope of work, an ordered plan or spec change materially changes the character of a work item from that on which the bid price was based, and the unit cost of the changed item differs when it's compared to the unit cost of that item under the original plans and specifications. Then full approved change order addresses the payment. So within the scope of work, you're going to have a work character change. Now, something that a number of us, and I do not like these, we have a force account, which when you come up with a force account, when you're out in the field, this is when the contractor and the agency cannot agree on a price. So what's going to happen? You're going to have a bid item adjustment, which equals the difference between. So you have a force account. Force account estimated cost of performing the work per original contract versus actual cost of performing work as changed. And they're both in the force account realm there. Again, force account, estimated cost of performing the work per original contract versus force account, actual cost of performing the work as changed. Then you have different site conditions. Type 1, actual subsurface or latent physical conditions materially different from those indicated or shown in the contract documents. Job site examination. Examples: groundwater where none indicated or reasonable expected. Quantity, strength, and size of rocks. As-built conditions different from the plans. Inaccurate log of test borings. That's where we get the term differing site conditions. Also, unknown physical conditions of an unusual nature that are materially different from the ordinarily encountered and generally recognized as inherent in the work provided in the contract. Examples: archaeological finds, endangered species, and of course, hazardous materials. And when we deal with differing site conditions, specified required in all federal aid contracts, and it also protects contractors from excessive risks, and it reduces bidding contingencies. And what happens when there is a differential or differing site conditions, the contractor notifies the RE. Now, the RE is a resident engineer. Some call them the IIC. Some call them the project engineer, RPR. It's the person that's running the project. And what happens is once the RE gets involved, they investigate and they make a determination, and they are going to see if an adjustment is warranted. If no, the contractor proceeds with work. If yes, there's a change order. And then, of course, cleanup. Contractor must leave the job site neat and presentable and dispose of all rubbish, false work, excessive materials, temporary structures, and equipment. Now, what is false work? False work would be considered scaffolding, some shoring. It could be considered cofferdams. Anything that is built temporarily so they could divert water, just as if they were putting in a bridge abutment. And equipment, a boom truck, an excavator. All right. Scope of work quiz. The following parts of a contract. Well, I just told you before. Choose the answer that is not correct. Well, change orders are not part of the contract. They're not part of the contract at all. Not part at all. Now they have down here that, special provisions can be part of the contract. They have down here the bid proposal and construction manual. Well, true, the bid proposal is not part of the contract, but I've never heard of a change order being part of the contract either, because the change order actually increases the contract value. True or false? Differing site conditions requires an order change from the RE, and that is definitely false. Why? Because the work character change requires an order change from the RE. True or false? In order to avoid delay costs, it's okay for the RE to direct the contractor to verbally begin CO work. That's definitely false. Written authorization is required. But there you have it. Scope of work. May did a video on this a little earlier, but it's a review for individuals to understand what's going on when it comes to construction. Because construction is a risky business, particularly when you have a lot of materials, you have a lot of labor, equipment. There are a lot of delays in construction because of the weather, could be some endangered species. Must also understand your due diligence and of course your permits, NPDES permits, some call them Rule 5. Construction, regardless whether it is vertical or horizontal, there's a lot of planning that goes into building a project. But what you need to understand is the contract. First of all, look at your specs. Now, let me tell you something about specs too. I know a lot of people say, oh, well, you got to listen to the specs. The specs only require you to do the minimum. It's a tolerance, it's a standard. You can go above the specs. Let's say if you're on a project and it requires number 5 bars. Well, if you don't have number 5 bars, but you have number 6 bars, you can use number 6 bars, but you cannot use number 4 bars. So you're going above the spec. You can't go below the spec. The spec is the minimum. Now, specs can be changed as well. Specs are guidelines. It's like a recipe. When you cook something, it gives you the basis, the basics. Bottom line is, comes to construction of the contract. Look at the scope of work. Look at what goes into the scope of work. Review the plans. Because one thing that inspectors don't do, or constructability, what doesn't happen much is when you have a lot of change orders on a project, that's going to balloon the cost of that project. Now, contractors love it because they can make a lot of money off of change orders. And if a contractor doesn't make money on one project, they're going to make it on another project. That's why they bid many projects. And in the end, understand what you're reading in the contract, understand the plans, specifications, documentations, understand the change order process. Most of all, understand who's on your team. Because regardless of all of the credentials, if you don't have a good team, you do not have a good project. Why? Because there's going to be conflicts. Your job as a constructor is to make sure that the client, it could be a government agency, it could be a realtor, they have a not only aesthetically good looking project, but a safe project. And why do I say that? Because you're going to have lives operating that project. And you want to make sure that the project meets the standards, specifications, and you also, again, I'll repeat myself, understand the scope of work. Understand that the scope of work is a documented source or it's specific task within the contract. And that concludes this topic on scope of work. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some political and social content, check out my main channel, the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show, also on YouTube. Here's where you can find me. The 411 Talk Zone Radio Show. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on X, formerly Twitter, Truth Social, and Rumble. And basically, I post videos every Wednesday. Now, for the QCIS channel, you can find me right here on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and LinkedIn. Now, generally post videos every Thursday, but there are times I've posted them on a Friday and posted them on a Saturday. And that just depends on how tired I am, because when you go to work full time and you make content, sometimes it shows your content doesn't come out as good when you're tired. But in the end, I thank you for viewing this content on the scope of work right here, QCIS channel. And on this channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Until next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful, gracious evening.